All right, so welcome back to the Generative AI in the Real World podcast. Today we have an old friend, Alfred Spector, visiting scholar at MIT and senior advisor at Blackstone. So, Alfred, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here and to see you again, Ben.
All right, so I guess, Alfred, we should start with just by way of introduction, maybe give us a little bit of a flavor for what your current roles are at MIT and Blackstone and what's the connection to data science and AI?
Sure, I'd love to talk about it. So at MIT, I've been doing a couple of things. One not so related. I've been catalyzing a new entrepreneurship curriculum that we have for our undergraduates. But related very much, I've been teaching a class based on the book, Data Science in Context, trying to explain to students and having them learn the variety of different things we need to do well if we're going to apply data science or really any data-driven method, including generative AI, effectively. So it's more than just the model. It's more than just attention. We have to do a bunch of things well. It's also more than just ethics. So that's my role at MIT, has been to teach that and to catalyze entrepreneurship. Uh, at Blackstone, we have ownership of almost a few hundred companies. And the question there is, how do these firms, not all of them are by any means gigantic firms, they're moderate-sized firms in many cases, how do they get into the world where generative AI is going to be playing really a very large role and having a big impact on them? So at Blackstone, as a senior advisor, we look at how is it that we can help these firms do the right thing here.
So I was fortunate enough to be one of the early preview reviewers of the book Data Science in Context. In fact, I named it my 2022 Book of the Year. It's excellent. I recommend everyone grab a copy, grab two copies, one for your manager, one for yourself, and read it. So I
Thank you,
guess
Ben.
I guess at the time of the release of the book, I spoke with you and Peter, and for this audience, I guess maybe Alfred, give us a sense of why you folks ended up writing that book in the first
Right.
place, and why was the book? Uh, why did that book have a certain kind of flavor instead of your Peter Norvig and Alfred Spector? People are expecting some deeply technical in the weeds book, but you ended up writing a really kind of really high impact, useful book that a lot of data teams can benefit from.
Right. And I'll even try to update it why I think it's still relevant in this world of generative AI, that being, of course, the point of this podcast. So Peter Norvig, who is, as you say, very well known for really deep contributions technically in artificial intelligence, as well as pedagogically with the book that he wrote with Russell. Uh, Jeanette Wing, who started the Data Science Institute at Columbia, and Chris Wiggins, who's the chief data scientist at the New York Times, also at Columbia. And I all agreed that it's more than the model, as I was saying before. It's more than just let's get some data, build a model, and make some predictions and hope for the best. So we had seen that. Perhaps I had seen it more than anyone because in a fairly senior executive position at Google and at IBM and also at an investment firm, Two Sigma, you could see that you could make all sorts of mistakes if you just blindly went forth and presumed that you could make a good prediction, a good recommendation, a good transformation, etc. So we believed that there are a variety of contextual things that you need to think about if you're going to get this right, and they're often the hardest. So what are the contextual things? Well, they're technical topics. So everyone is always going to bring up privacy. You're going to bring up security. You think about resilience in these systems, something we're well aware of now in generative AI. What about abuse? How do we deal with abuse in these systems? We have to really understand understandability. Must it be the case that if we make a prediction or a recommendation, we have to explain why? Many people think that's extremely important, and it isn't. some instances, others perhaps not. Do we have to understand causality? Oftentimes, just showing associations and predictions might not be useful, certainly in scientific realms, but also in public policy. And then oftentimes, particularly in this world where there's so much scientific fraud, you need reproducibility as well. You need to be able to show people that we really have done something well and that they can reproduce it. Just a couple more. We also thought, as we looked at it, it's easy to gloss over what we mean by the objectives of the system. We want to make a good recommendation. Well, what does that really mean? How are we concerned about filter bubbles versus the breadth of opinions? How do we balance those issues? How do we decide what's optimal versus what might not be? So those decisions end up taking an enormous amount of time to get right. And we're seeing that now all play out in the world of generative AI as well. Is it okay that we have a creative variation on a beautiful photograph that's made by a DALL-E kind of image generator, or is it going to be is it a bad objective because it's going to be infringing on the right of the artist whose style is being copied to some extent? We have to make sure that when we build these systems, that we're attacking problems that actually probably admit to some failure, because any of these stochastic systems will occasionally fail. So I just saw a note from Anthropic come by saying, no, we don't really recommend you use our system for making absolutely critical decisions. Probably good advice. And then, of course, there are always long-term societal impacts we should be taking into account. We should be thinking about how these things will affect the world around us. So that's one set of context. So that's more than just attention, more than just the right kind of regression or whatever we're doing as a model, and it's more than just data. Both of those are well known to be issues. Second context is the application is very critical. So whether we're doing something around recommending music that's relatively benign, it's not going to be really a huge issue, versus recommending news stories that people read. Very different. So summarizing some creative writing that I might do for someone is a very different task than trying to summarize a legal document. So we have to think about the context in many domains. We have to think about the society where we're doing things as well, because different societies have different points of view. That makes things complicated. I heard a presentation yesterday where someone thought we'll all get together and reach commonality on this, but we won't. I think it's highly naive to believe that. So there are lots of societal differences, and then temporal differences as well. What seems to be right today probably was not necessarily right 15 years ago, and we don't know what it's going to be. So that's why we wrote the book. All the things apply, and in fact, they apply larger today because the stakes are even higher than when we wrote it.
So one of the points that you've been making recently is that we definitely should pay attention to ethics, and ethics is important, but that in making these trade-offs, ethics alone may not be enough. So you talk about understanding field-specific challenges, a commitment to integrity, and of course, leveraging the understanding of ethicists and engaging with broader communities, including the liberal arts. So maybe you can kind of explain what you mean by each of these.
Right. So Ben, thank you for bringing it up. I did write a paper for the communications of the ACM, which is maybe the leading computer science technical journal, where I argued that indeed, as technical people, as whether we're machine learning people or AI people or data people, we have to first attend to all of the issues that are the sort of technical issues in our domain. So that's, as I said before, more than just the model, more than just the data, but security and resilience and those things. Just like someone that's building an airplane, they don't think just about aerodynamics. They need to think about resilience of the plane because of metal fatigue. They have to think about oxidation. Obviously, now we know you need to think very carefully about the manufacturing processes and the documentation that every step has been done right in the manufacturing. So there are many things in every field, just like in the world of medicine as well. It's not just does the drug work, but what's the risk of drug abuse from the drug or drug interactions or long-term dependency. So we have to do all of those things. Second thing, which we're reminded of regularly from many of the articles we read, and that is that we have to do them truthfully. So we shouldn't say, oh, this is really secure when we know there's a bug in it. Now, we may make mistakes, right? That's inevitable, but we have to really work hard. In the old days, I think, and you go back kind of far in this, Ben, we were like desperate to prove any of this stuff worked, right? Well, it works. So this is no longer just like, oh, that's cool, we can go do this. We're doing real things today. So we have to actually assert that we are doing these things to the best of our ability. Here are the risks. Here's what we do. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know, etc. So that's the second point. The field-specific challenges, integrity, and then finally, many of the issues that we read about where now there are these great debates, these are the debates of humankind over the centuries, over the millennia, right? What's right? What's wrong? What rights does the individual have versus what right does the state have to specify what individuals have? How do we balance economic growth versus issues of equality? Those are interesting questions to reach. How do we look at nation state advantage versus international activities? All of these things now are playing a role in the regulation of these technologies, in how we develop them. And I believe that requires now that our students have kind of a T-shaped education, is what we said and what's often said. And that is that they have a good basis in economics and political science, understanding some history, reading some literature so that we see what creative people think about the future. And then with that basis of these subjects, including philosophy and ethics, absolutely, then we can go forth and we will make the best decisions we can make. And they'll be hard because these are the decisions that civilizations have been having trouble making correctly for all of history.
So I know you spent some time at Google,
I did.
and one of the things that one of those kind of I don't know if it's a true quote or not, but attributed to Steve Jobs, right? So the whole Google is all about engineering, Apple is all about engineering plus humanities, right?
So that's interesting. I suspect Steve was discussing this mostly from the point of view of human factors
Yeah.
and the elegance of the solution, which Apple has done really a tremendous job with. So I had the pleasure of knowing Steve and hosting him at Carnegie Mellon many decades ago. That would have been my guess as to what he's thinking, but I'm no expert. At Google, I think maybe we were certainly less focused on visual things than Apple in the early days, so that's certainly true. But I believe that to do these things well at any company now, we have to be thinking far more broadly than which ad will get the most click, right? It's there's more than that, and we know that, and it's not entirely the case that all you want to do with a recommendation system is maximize the likelihood that someone will click on the next recommendation, right? There are more things that we now need to take into account. We have to take into account, the societal implications. It doesn't mean that everything we do, we have to go to philosophers and what have you, but we have to think through how this will all impact the world around us, and that will impact our corporation, our not-for-profit, our government, wherever we're applying these things. And that requires more breadth than we used to have.
So I'm going to return to your rubric in a second, but while
Sure.
I have you, and since you see a lot of companies kind of either struggling with or thriving in AI and data science, I've been reading a bunch of surveys, and here are some of the things Alfred, that pop up on the organizational and cultural challenges side of these surveys, right? So the first one is AI literacy and skills gap. So basically, the lack of AI knowledge and skills among employees might hinder adoption. Is this something that you agree with, or is this some, or should do you think companies should invest in kind of getting some basic AI 101 knowledge for a broader swath of employees?
So I think there is a skill gap. So certainly, if you go to Silicon Valley and you know walk around downtown Palo Alto, you don't see that. But if you go into the world more broadly, into businesses that are extremely good at something that may seem very esoteric to the world, right? Someone manufactures everything, someone provides a service and everything. Many people don't know much about this. So I think it is important that these companies, even if they don't know exactly what they're going to be doing with the technology, they have at least some people that are beginning to probe the opportunities that exist. So a message that I give is don't necessarily look for the strategic, long-term end goal with respect to generative AI or whatever. Go learn where this can work and where it can't work. Begin to have some employees that are proponents, and there is a skills gap.
So the other thing that I'm hearing, Alfred, is, and this again, this might not be true here in the Bay Area, but there might still be some resistance to adopting AI, maybe due to fears about job displacement, or maybe because they don't trust the technology, or they're not familiar with the benefits and the strengths of the technology. So are you also sensing some level of resistance to adoption of AI technology?
I think it's natural whenever there's a technological change to see at least a couple of things occur. So, number one, it isn't as if everyone was sitting around twiddling their thumbs saying, oh, I need something new to go do. So people are busy. They have agendas, they have product plans and roadmaps and customer service organizations that are all very busy. So the idea of now putting something else on the plate usually means taking something else off. So that's always an issue, and that's been true when we moved to distributed systems from mainframes, when we, et cetera, all the way through. So I think that's common. That's happening here. Second thing that's also true, that's always happened too, is that people get very good at something. So if your skill is really writing test cases for certain kinds of computer programs, and something else will, make that very different to go do, you're sort of like, well, I'm really good at this. And it's like, I don't know how to do this other thing. So it's just hard to switch. The fear factor is an interesting one. I don't know. I have less understanding of that. I think for the most part, my impression of what I have seen is that most people think there's way more to do than there are people to do the work. And I think that will be one of the very big questions we'll see play out. But if the elasticity of demand is very high and the costs go down, right, or effectively the productivity of individuals go up, will we just actually be producing more services, producing more products, and doing more with the likelihood actually of everyone getting paid better and companies making more money? I think, I even saw, sort of Larry Summers, I think, muse on this fact recently. I think this is what we all hope. And I think at least for a while, I think there's a reasonable likelihood that that's true. Now, whether individuals feel that way, I don't really know, but I do feel locally, they all feel very busy. So if I can give you something that'll make you a little bit faster at what you're doing, I think you say, sure. Now, will you say, oh my God, but I may not need to do anything soon? I'm not sure you'll think that way.
So in the companies that you see at Blackstone, so to what extent are people trying to come up with an overarching vision or governance framework for generative AI at this point? And do you think that's something that people should consider? I mean, by and the idea there is maybe that will help them think through the use cases, the potential risks,
Yeah.
and
So
kind of
I think the answer is it's very variable, of course, across such a
yeah.
large group of companies. We have companies where generative AI is going to be absolutely formative in the future of what they're doing, right? They generate lots of prose, they generate they do all manner of text processing and such things. It's very clear that generative AI represents both a huge opportunity to generate new value products, right, that you couldn't otherwise afford to build, and to do things more cheaply. So I think those things are very strategic. Other places, I think, probably just need to kick the tires at this point more and learn. And I did hear though behind your point and I think in a way your question was almost rhetorical to lead to this conclusion. At some point, a company has to step back and say, what are we doing with this? Is this something that's going to improve our reach with customers because now we can create personalized correspondence to everyone and have exactly the right roadmaps of how it is that we can introduce things to customers and predict what those will be? That could very well be true. At some point, will it fundamentally change the nature of our products? Will it give us more efficiency in all of our back office or our logistics operations? And there's opportunities in all of these things now as we see generative AI having impacts on robotics. I think it is important at some point after you've kicked the tires, even if you're not one of these firms where it's just obvious, you need to put together a roadmap and say, all right, what will we do over 18 months, 36 months, whatever the period of time is?
And what is the, I guess, one thing I'm noticing, Alfred, is people really make a distinction between internal and external facing applications, right? So if it's internal within the company, maybe you're a little more tolerant for hallucination or lack of explainability, right? But if it's external, then maybe the stakes are higher. Maybe your rollout strategy has to be a lot more rigorous. And
I think that's true. So really what's going on, so just to bring this back to the rubric, the question is, when is it that you can be fault tolerant, right? This sixth of our rubric elements. So indeed, if I am making a recommendation to an employee, we've done a case analysis automatically of a number of things. We think you should look primarily at these three things. That's what the employee sees. That's very time saving. It's relatively safe as long as the employee, if you will, doesn't get lazy and say, oh, I'm just going to take what the computer and the AI system says, and I'll just like do that and then go have lunch. So we have to be kind of careful of that unintended consequence. And indeed, if you just go straight to the customer, but indeed, you can go to customers too with the mitigation of checking and employees being in the middle of the loop, right? So you can save a lot of time, even in customer service operations. You can attempt to do things, as we know, with call center automation tools now using generative AI, and make it very easy if the customer has a problem to get a human, and now maybe the human won't be delayed, right? The human can actually solve the hard problems.
Alfred, so going back kind of to this skills gap question, prior to the release of ChatGPT, maybe AI and machine learning, um, the barrier to entry was slightly higher because you still
Right.
need a data science team, someone with some expertise in deep learning, and
Yeah.
now it's very developer friendly. I mean, so many of the people that I'm running into who are starting companies, they're not ML or data science people; they're just developers. And now that a lot of these things are accessible through simple API, simple Python, um, you can build something interesting. So,
Look, and even to interrupt just for a second, but even
yeah,
now prompt engineering,
yeah,
right, has
yeah,
become kind of it's inaccessible, but a slightly specialized skill set that people are proud to be good at.
yeah. I mean, now basically the equivalent of penetration testing in cybersecurity is this red teaming, right? So you need some people who are relentless, creative, who can really probe and find weaknesses in the systems. But since the technology is a lot more accessible, all you need is a developer who's a little proficient in Python. Um, what level of science knowledge or ML knowledge do you think companies should still have in their teams in order to make sure that they're doing things properly, rigorously? Because you still need someone who can uh, evaluate whether or not it's time to deploy something, right?
Right. So I suppose I'm not sure this is the right answer. So I hope you have other guests that will help you answer this even better over time. But it seems to me there would be sort of two categories of expertise that are somewhat different. So one is the broad perspective on the product and the service that we have to do. So you need to look at what comes out of this and say, well, is this good?
It's the domain specific,
Yeah.
vertical specific knowledge, right? So,
Right. So is this really good? So, if it's an airline customer self-service application or whatever, and you look at the results and say, no, you don't get it. Even 1% is really bad. We can't have 1% failures. And to make these holistic decisions on what is good and what is bad requires quite a bit of thought. And it's kind of harder than when you're with people in a call center, you're doing training and things. Now we actually have lots of data to look at and try to make decisions on how to continually optimize these systems over time. The second is there is and we've been discussing this, is what is the difference between generative AI and the more traditional data-oriented optimization tasks? I think they're both data-driven methods, but they're different, right? So if you're doing quantitative trading, the exact number of days in a month, the precise price that something's at, the accounting for stock splits at exactly the right time and ex-dividends and acquisitions. And if you're looking at all of this data, it has to be done with immense precision. And I think it's different if you're doing logistics and you're looking at routing trucks or trying to figure out the cheapest path for delivery and measuring time and such things. Those things, they're great tools for now, and the tools are better and better. But I think it's still a more mathematical and more analytical discipline. What I think we will get to, though, is more and more vertical vendors that are in vertical areas that solve these issues increasingly well and vertical after vertical. You see this in the cloud providers. You see this already in the established vertical providers, the Salesforce.coms and SAPs that want to go do this. You're seeing this in a bazillion startups as well. So I think we will get more and more tools, even across all these domains, to make this easier within very specific application areas.
but you still need someone on your team with some minimum level of knowledge of statistics and ML just to look at these metrics and evaluation uh, uh, of these applications, right? Because I guess the kind of the joke right now, Alfred, is we've gone from really having a hard time building applications to now you can build something interesting in a week, but now it may take you 10 weeks to evaluate whether or not it's good enough to deploy.
Well, I think that's correct, and I think that's the perspective that we need to have, and so there's still great value in that. And a lot of the people that have that perspective understand where the technology could go wrong. So it's not just that I am the world's expert in the business area, but I think there's some understanding of this will be the Achilles heel in what we've done, and you know enough to look at that corner case or that collection of that attack vector, whatever it might be. And none of the security and those issues don't go away completely, right? So all those things remain with us.
By the way, so last year, I would say the word of the year was Copilot. So you have a generative AI system assisting a human worker, right? So this year, there are two words. The first one is multimodal, Let's set that aside. The second
Okay.
word is agents, right? So agents connotes a little more autonomy than the co-pilot, and so now people are talking about building agents that can do very specific things or tasks, right? Um, Maybe some minimum amount of reasoning and planning, but let's say just do something specific. But then, in the context of working with other agents, so multi-agent applications and things like this. So I think we're going to start seeing applications, Alfred, where maybe there's even no human in the loop. So the stakes are even higher in terms of getting it right, right?
Well, that would be true. Let me tell you though, I want to brag about one of my students from many decades ago. His name was Dean Thompson. Hopefully, he'll listen to this. He's a senior software engineer of some variety at Yelp, and he expressed something to me that I thought was really enlightening, because he's using a lot of these co-pilot like things in the course of his teams and his own work. What he said is it's really a diversity play, is that we all believe that having diverse points of view and backgrounds together on a team gives us some of the benefits of pluralism and understanding things from different perspectives. That's how he sees these AI techniques in his domain really working out. He's a human, right? He's a, I don't know, nearly 60-year-old human at the moment with an enormous amount of experience in software development. He has these other tools that are very good at having learned patterns, at having done other things from various points of view. He views himself as building a diverse team, and that's how it works together. And I really liked that metaphor.
Yeah, and sometimes actually you need that diversity to just get out of the group think as well, right? Because maybe you all have certain assumptions, and it takes some different perspective to
Right.
break you out of that thinking.
At Google in the early 2010s, it was clear this was all bubbling up towards more of a froth and or more of a actually of a milkshake, not just a froth, a really good thing happening. I started talking a lot about hybrid intelligence, and that never really caught on as a term. I like the term because I really did see it's about people and machines together. And I think we're still there for the most part. I still think that's the likelihood of where this will be. Now, sure, there's no doubt that an AI kind of machine learning technology is going to be better at understanding a lesion that's detected with a camera and a photograph and multispectral imaging than a human can be. So there'll be very specific things where machines do very well. But I think where we really think about intelligence, it's going to be a coalition.
Yeah, and actually, honestly, just to kind of dial back on the hype on agents, I mean, even these very task-specific agents that are supposed to do something for you online, even, right? So uh, they're fragile; they can break, right? Because for one thing, they're based on models that you may or may not control completely, right? So maybe you did some fine tuning to refine that model. But
Right.
secondly, ultimately, the agent will do a task on involving some sort of service you don't control. So it could break right there, right? So, for example, maybe you write an agent that will order some esoteric list of groceries for you on DoorDash, right? So, but then it has to go to DoorDash, and what if DoorDash makes some changes, right? So, a lot of these things are very
No,
fragile, right? So,
there are many fragile things in the world. The thing about humans is that we're not always that fast and not perfect, but we're pretty good at dealing with situations that we've never encountered before.
so let's close this discussion on a topic I'm not particularly fond of, Alfred, which is regulations, right?
Sure.
So you are in the East Coast, but here in California, we are grappling with SB 1047. So, as many listeners know, right? So, California is probably home of some of the leading AI companies. So, pretty much most foundation models, right? So, OpenAI,
Mhm.
Anthropic,
Yep.
Meta, Llama, Google
Yep.
Gemini. based in headquarters in California. So SB 1047, the California Safe and Secure Innovation for Frontier AI Models Act, is a state bill to regulate the development and deployment of advanced AI models in California. So it's still under discussion. It's it's worrying a lot of people out here. I mean, I think they're still taking amendments, but the point here is that I guess some people are arguing: is it too early to even talk about regulation of this type? Where they're even kind of proposing creating a new agency, right? So dedicated to this. So
Right.
but the point is that even if you're a developer following the space, I mean, every day is a new development, right?
So yes, I was at a discussion yesterday at the Harvard Data Science Review 5th anniversary, and there was someone from the EU proposing all manner of these activities that you say you don't like, and I think these were not that well informed. Look,
well, that's the I don't know if you've probably heard of the old Silicon Valley joke, right? So let's have a party. Silicon Valley will bring the software, China will bring the hardware, EU will bring the regulations.
Right. So look, I have clarity on just a couple of things. So number one, in my view, the most important thing is regulate uses of technology. So if we care about self-driving cars, there's an enormous body of regulations on how cars work.
Right,
and
right.
how to
And
drive.
NHTSA, right? So
Right. So let's, if we're going to regulate drones, we're going to regulate them by the rules of airways, and maybe we'll make some changes, but it's very specific to that. If we're going to regulate in things in healthcare, we are going to apply the standards of physicians to whatever AIs that we use in healthcare
or medical devices.
and medical devices. And will there be changes at the margin? Absolutely. There'll be some changes, right? So today, in liability of cars, if you're driving the car, probably the liability is yours. Maybe it's, the brakes weren't put on right or something, but probably it's the driver. If it's a self-driving car that you own and it's driving you around, it may not be you, right? You own the car, but you bought it from someone else and it's driving. So we're going to look at liability. That will change, right? We may look at thresholds of risk and such things. That's fine. If we look at copyright law, so we have a copyright law today. Does it need to change some? Possibly, right? There's a question of style, right? If these systems can learn style and reproduce style at very low cost, maybe that's different. Maybe copyright should extend like patent does, sort of a little bit to style, right? Possibly. I think these are great debates.
And maybe even I guess kind of the equivalent of name, image, likeness, right? So your voice.
Yes, that's so. All of these things within domain. Like, for example, I think if you saw my head on some other body doing something I didn't like, I think that's sort of a libel-like notion, right? It's sort of, I don't want to be represented that way. Perhaps, at least I don't know. But I would see, looking at that, not from the perspective, it could be an algorithm, it could be AI, it could be someone that's really good at videography that splices things together. It doesn't make any difference to me. I don't care.
But
It
these
might or might not be acceptable.
Alfred, these regulations are kind of aiming at the models, which is kind of the
Right.
basic thing, right?
So my view is,
Yeah.
I think first, I think it's not right, because the models can be used in all different areas where if I'm a creative writer, I don't care necessarily whether the model has been trained on God's gifts to, objectivity or not. It's not important. I'm a creative writer. So I think looking at the technology first is the wrong way of looking at this. The way to look at it is look at the uses of the technology, and then look at where we have laws, and we have lots of them. And we were never able to say, how are we going to regulate all steel? It's very different. Steel I-beams for a bridge are different than sheet metal in a car. So we actually have rules probably on car safety with steel, and we have rules on on the American Association of Highway and Safety Transportation Officials that govern the use of steel and the importance of steel in highway bridges, they're very different. So that's my view on this. I think it's a mistake in general to look at this, and I think it will slow things down. It's extremely difficult because to regulate, because it's very complicated, these systems, and it's difficult for regulators to have sufficient skill in it, and it's also very difficult to prevent, I think, some slowing down of this technology, which frankly has nation state implications, right? Because there are international ramifications of this today.
Yeah, yeah. And with
so you
that,
got an answer from me.
Yes, yeah, and I like the answer because I agree with it. So, and with that,
All right.
thank you, Alfred.
So it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for having me.